All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cam Chumley, and today I'm here to talk about connected vehicle-to-everything security. I know it's a tough time, so I'm going to go ahead and start by saying thank you so much for coming out to this presentation. I know the cookies were great outside, and there were stacks of them, so thank you a million times over. So let's get started. I'm going to do a poll really quick in the audience. Please raise your hands. In the event that you were to fall down your house, how many of you would like for the ambulance to get there fast? Raise your hand. All right, there we go. That sounds good, okay? In the event that you're driving down an intersection, and let's say a pedestrian crosses the street, how many of you would want to know there's a pedestrian crossing a street before you actually got to that intersection and had to slam on the brakes? Raise your hand. All right, for all those of you watching home, 100% pretty much, right? So we're going to talk a little about what exactly that means. And being totally transparent here, I transitioned into this role about a year ago, and I have a traditional OT security background looking at things like manufacturing, utilities, oil and gas. And it never really occurred to me that there's a whole nother vertical of looking at intelligent transportation systems, or what we call ITS, right? Connected Vehicle-to-Everything, V2X. And that's what I'm here to talk about because it is honestly mind-blowing. So the whole goal for this presentation is to educate the entire OT community about what that looks like and us needing really more visibility and presence in that vertical. Looking at some of the things on this front cover, a traffic signal controller. This is going to be a basis for a lot of things we talk about today. Every one of those sweet, sweet traffic cabinets you see at the intersections, inside of that has a traffic signal controller that can actually change the patterns of those traffic lights. We're going to talk about some of those use cases later. Next, surveillance cameras. I think we all have a good idea what that is. Please don't give us a ticket, right? Next is weather information systems. This is essentially, think about an ensemble of sensors across all the different roadways that can determine roadside conditions. Traffic signal priority and preemption. Going back to that ambulance use case, or maybe a police responder use case, that's where this would come into. Essentially getting those first responders from point A to point B. How you can do that is actually interacting with the traffic signal controller itself and changing what I'm going to refer to as the traffic grid. Okay, I know, I come up here, I'm talking about you fall down, you have your life alert, help me, I can't get up, you need some police response or emergency vehicles. But I want to highlight really quick, looking directly at CIS's website, we think about traditional industrial verticals all the time. But if you look right there, highway and motor carrier, traffic management systems, and cyber systems used for operations management, right? So it's not a nuclear power grid, right? It's not governed by NTCIP, and that's what makes this so critical. In 2015, they released a transportation systems sector-specific plan. I want to go in and foot stomp right now that as it stands today, there's no mandated cybersecurity requirements in this space, right? I know that's spreading across other verticals, but when you think about some of the messaging that happens and how critical they are, it's a bit shocking. All right, we're looking at 4 million words on the screen right now, but I'm going to explain what this looks like. So you see the SAA J2 735. Think about this as the language for how these intelligent transportation systems actually talk to one another, okay? There's a ton of different messages, and each one of these have different functions. On the right-hand side, you're seeing the NTCIP standards. NTCIP standards, think about this as how different intelligent transportation systems actually interact with those traffic controllers that sit inside those traffic cabinets. The first thing that we're going to do, if you look at number 1 under SAA J2 735, we have what's called a basic safety message. It's exactly as explained. It is literally the initial component and the most foundational component of these messages. We're going to break it down a little bit just to see, all right, Cam, this is great, but what exactly is in these messages? So you see we have things like the time, the position, the transmission, the speed, the heading. And it should be noted, all of those messages that I showed in the previous slide, it's actually divvied up into 2 different groups. One of them can be messages coming from the infrastructure itself. So there's actually these things that are called Roadside Units, RSUs, that sit on the intersections that are constantly transmitting data and messages to all the vehicles and pedestrians that are crossing. On the other end of it, you actually have messages coming from what we call an onboard unit, an OBU. And those onboard units reside on the vehicles themselves, and they also send data to the roadside units. So using that relationship is how we can make changes across things in intelligent transportation systems. So we're looking at right now, these are actually some of the components that are in that basic safety message. And you're seeing things like vehicle direction, vehicle speed, and as these vehicles are going down the street, they are broadcasting these at an insane 10 messages per second. So if you can think about a highway or you can think about a very congested intersection, that is a ton of messages. And to make things even better, a majority of all of these infrastructures actually don't have the capabilities for PKI, which means a lot of it is unencrypted and they have no sort of authentication, especially at the OBU level, which is wild to me. So from a mapped data example, this is another one of the messages we looked at previously. Earlier, we looked at the basic safety message. That's actually coming from the vehicle itself. Again, 10 messages a second. This is a map data. So a map data message is being sent from the intersection itself, and it's constantly broadcasting to all the vehicles coming in, saying, I recognize all the lanes, we're at this intersection. It can actually coordinate with the vehicle's coordinates, so that way it knows if it needs to change the lights or if it's an autonomous vehicle that's driving, what lane to put that autonomous vehicle in. Okay, some common issues. So we'll talk about some bad habits here, folks. So this is the DOT, Department of Transportation implementation. So you're seeing here that we have there's a traffic controller, there's a traffic light, and there's a switch or a router, and that router is actually connected to a 5G antenna at the bottom of that traffic cabinet. We're seeing some of the other equipment that's on top of the intersection itself, but why that's so bad is literally anybody could just walk over to that 5G antenna and they could tamper with it, and everything we just talked about wouldn't even matter. Not to mention of the fact that if there's no guardrails in place, again, another physical issue. Here's another one. There's some goofy examples here. Work is canceled, go back home. We'd all love to see that every day. On the right-hand side, be alert for tanks. Life is great, but bringing it down just a little bit, even if somebody were to go change the speed limits, let's say somebody were to put a message on there of someone was actually kidnapped, or even something maybe potentially darker. All of these have physical consoles you can go into. They use default credentials, and you can change right there. And they're also managed typically at some centralized location. It can be over HTTP. There's typically a post message that'll change some of these signs. And if you Google this, there's some pretty wild ones out there that were too inappropriate to put in my presentation. So feel free to check it out if you want a good giggle. All right, so the traffic controllers. Going back to traffic cabinets, what that looks like. Not many of us have probably seen what exactly does it look like inside these traffic cabinets. You take a look here, this is some Cisco equipment, right? And just going forward, to give everybody an idea, I'm gonna talk about what we've been doing at Cisco for a solution like this, because again, it's really big on the education piece. I was completely unaware before I joined this role, and it's been eye-opening for me. So we have some industrial routers. Those are the things that are starting with IR. And we also have industrial Ethernet switches, the India Echo ones that are labeled there. And then we have a traffic signal controller that are right in the middle. And what's so crazy about this, and all of these are all ruggedized equipment and they're great products, if somebody walks up to this, all you need is literally a $5 generic key card that works in a majority of traffic cabinets around the country. I'm gonna let that sit for a second. $5. That's a Starbucks coffee, and those add up, trust me. Just like all the other verticals, ITS also has its vulnerabilities. And I'm not saying, I think we all know here, it'd probably be a tall feat to say you have to patch every vulnerability out there. It definitely depends on your architecture. It depends on your remediation program, right? But for this one specifically, it actually had an authentication bypass to it, to where you could bypass all credentials for authentication as long as it was a public internet-facing camera. And don't worry, we have a real-life example. So this is West Virginia Turnpike, where it actually was using a public IP address using port forwarding. And here it is. So it's a screw up in 3 parts. First, we have the unencrypted traffic on HTTP. We have a public IP address. Oh, and mind you, we have port forwarding. And what that's meaning is you're accessing a public IP address, and the second that you're entering that public IP address, it's converting using port 8000, and now you're actually inside the architecture within the private IP range. Let that sit for a second. Yeah, same, for sure. So if you look at how this works in an actual example, the hacker comes in. They access the network through that public IP address. They forward over TCP 8000. They get to the CCTV. And you may be sitting here thinking, okay, Cam, that's great, but it's just a camera. Why would I even be concerned about this? Just like so many other examples that we've seen time and time again, don't worry, folks, there's no segmentation, and it's a totally flat network. So now the attacker can actually pivot from CCTV, because it's on the same segment, to a traffic signal controller. What does that mean? They can now impact those critical traffic operations. All right, let's talk about some solutions here. Physical security. This has been around forever, folks, right? GPIO, using pins in and out. But this is the thing. Somebody gets that $5 key. a lot of times there is no sort of security on a physical basis for those cabinets. Somebody comes in, they open it up. By the way, if you're using a managed service provider that uses a private APN, all you need to authenticate through that is literally a SIM card. So if there's no way to detect if somebody comes in, you could theoretically pop out that SIM card and plug it to any other device and have authentication to the rest of the network. Let that sit for a second. So now, by using something like the GPIO and having alerts in place, you'll get syslog alerts. Your traffic engineers will get notifications. Your IT team, your InfoSec team. So it's critical to start here. Next, it's segmentation, right? Everybody knows we want to do a deny by default first. And in our situation, there's a ton of amazing visibility products out there. For Cisco, this is an industrial router on there. And we use what's called CyberVision, which is essentially an OT visibility and monitoring product. And really, the grand scheme of the whole message here is you have to know what's out there, right? You have to know the network telemetry. You have to know insecure protocols. You have to know when things change. You have to know insecure remote access. You got to know what's there before you get to the next step. And then authentication, right? 802.1x, in the event that it doesn't have any sort of certificate or isn't 802.1x enabled, that's when you use something like MAB, right? And then you would feed that into a NAC, an Active Directory, in order to have that secure access control. And segmentation, right? It's not just important looking at the IDMZ, that's a great start, but we have to segment our network, and that's a flashback what we talked about earlier with that camera situation. All right. This, on the left-hand side, you're seeing is actually a CyberVision map. So that's looking at devices, and all of our visibility product actually sits as a container within that traffic cabinet. So typically, you have an industrial router that's in the traffic cabinet. We'll have our product that sits inside of it as a Docker container, and then it's looking at all of the network telemetry that comes by. And using that, you'd feed it into your NAC, which is ICE for us, Identity Services Engine. And using ICE, you would build out a matrix to say who can access what and when they can access it. This breaks it down a bit more. We have Alice with the good old hard hat. And then on the bottom, we actually have a traffic signal controller, a traffic light. So really two different categories here, user identity and device identity. For the user identity, that's whenever you are 802.1x capable. And for device identity, that's when you use something like MAB. And we can see here how that flow process works, also in conjunction with Active Directory. Amazing. So let's talk about some different ways the architecture plays out, okay? Of course, you have your fiber. You can use backhaul. For those who aren't familiar with backhaul, think about it like a long wireless extension cord with radios. And you have cellular. In our use case, we've had a ton of success when it comes to cellular, right? And the reason for that is we actually use SD-WAN or software-defined networking. And now by using that, we can encrypt all the traffic. We can use 5G. And by using 5G, now we have a means to do centralized authentication mechanisms. If you look at this example specifically, that's our industrial router 1101, and we have on top of that what we call edge intelligence. Now earlier I made a note that every 10 seconds one of these messages is sent from a vehicle. That is absurd. So if you think about the numbers that could aggregate to after a while, it gets incredibly confusing for a traffic signal controller. That's a ton of white noise. So what we do is we made essentially a container that runs in our routers or our switches that have a ton of connectors that takes all the traffic that comes in from those onboard units and roadside units, and they essentially say, we only care about the important messages. Everything else is fuzz. So it goes through the edge intelligence first, and then using the edge intelligence, it can send those messages to the traffic signal controller to make changes in what, again, I'm going to call the traffic grid. And then underneath that, we have the industrial switch, and that's where you have the CyberVision for visibility and monitoring from an OT security standpoint. All right, this is the fun part, y'all. So going back to talking about onboard units and roadside units, I'm going to put something in perspective for you. Whenever you drove here, I mean, I'm sure we all took an Uber here if you flew, unless you live in Tampa. Tampa's a beautiful place, by the way. You probably saw traffic cabinets all over the place, but no one ever really thinks, what is the likelihood that this would become smart architecture? Connected vehicle to everything. From a price standpoint, just to essentially make one of those intersections smart, we're going to call it, would be anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 just for the radio itself. A quick Google and use of ChatGPT for me told me that Tampa actually has 550 signalized traffic intersections, and that's just for the radio itself. We're not even talking about all the PKI and authentication mechanisms. We're not talking about the security products. We're not talking about encryption. So that can get very, very heavy for smaller cities, counties, and states out there, right? So how can that change? First, we have to start a little bit of a history lesson. We started with what's called DSRC, Directed Short Range Communication. So going back to this conversation on roadside units and onboard units, initially, we used what's called DSRC. Now, this has been around for a bit, but DSRC inherently actually sends unencrypted traffic back and forth at broadcast. So what the FCC actually allocated all of the 5.9 gigahertz spectrum strictly to DSRC because it realized that in the future, there would be a high likelihood that this connected vehicle-to-everything architecture was going to happen. What ended up happening is they actually broke some of the spectrum off and they assigned it to unlicensed Wi-Fi. And because of that, now DSRC is less prominent. And as we move to more cellular-based intersections, that became the creation of what we call connected vehicle-to-everything, which also shares 5.9 gigahertz, but you have more distance, you're using cellular, and what's great about that, again, is now you have the authentication mechanism, and instead of just having that relationship between a roadside unit and an onboard unit, now you can talk directly up to the Verizon network. And using the Verizon network can actually send messages back to the roadside unit or the onboard unit. And it gets even better than that. Now you can throw in this connected vehicle-to-everything architecture, you can send messages to pedestrians themselves. You can send alerts over an entire city, county, or state. And as we move more towards autonomous vehicles, you can actually interact with the vehicles themselves. Scary, right? Yeah. Great. So we approached this problem a couple years ago, and I'm going to take a moment to really shout out Mark Nellinger, Snowbird Khan, and Laura Perrick, who might be in the audience, who did some amazing work of really championing this entire effort. Some of the partners included in this whole solution, we were big on public-private partnerships, so we wanted to have a holistic approach, what that looks like. So we worked with a lot of those cities, counties, and states. The first one you're seeing is Neutron Edge. Now what this is Neutron Edge actually serves as a container. It runs as a NUC or on top of our industrial routers on the vehicles themselves, serving as that onboard unit, right? And what it does is it's actually, think about it like an accelerated GNSS system or GPS system for emergency response vehicles. And it actually uses the next step in this partnership, Verizon Business. And so what Verizon is doing is Verizon is serving as what we talked about earlier. They are essentially taking, before was only physical onboard units, physical roadside units, those $5,000 to $10,000 radios, and we're making it all virtual. So now everybody can play. And what that means is as long as you have a cellular connection using 5G, you can now use routers to talk directly up to the Verizon cloud and skip the infrastructure altogether from the onboard unit or the roadside unit if you want it. So now going back, if we think back to that traffic cabinet I showed earlier with all the Cisco gear in it, now that is serving as the roadside unit. That is serving as what we're going to refer to going forward as a virtual RSU, and that's going to be both for the onboard unit and the roadside unit, okay? So then you come to us, Cisco. So not only do we have the 5G cellular connectivity, remember we talked about edge intelligence, it has the connectors there that can actually filter out all that white noise and only focus on the critical messages. That's residing in the IOX container on our routers themselves. And then beneath that, you have the cyber vision sensor for visibility and monitoring, threat response, any sort of incident response you need. And then to the right of that, we need to have a power player in the space. Q-Free is essentially a next generation traffic controller. So it's essential to bring everybody in all aspects of this to tackle the business together. And to give you an example, folks, we go to some of these ITS conferences all the time. We hardly ever see anybody talk about cybersecurity. It actually hurts my heart on a deep level because it's mostly about how do we get A to B, communication, which is incredibly important, but this space is accelerating so fast that we really do need to raise awareness. All right, so let's do an example here. I try to make it pretty drawn for us, bear with me. So we see here that LiDAR, which LiDAR is essentially a way that you're detecting things around an area using light, it bounces, it creates a reflection, then you have an image based off of that. It's a ton of data, but again, with edge intelligence, we can break it up and take just the most critical pieces. So you have LiDAR, detects pedestrian crossing the zone, maybe they're on their phone, I don't know, eating a snack, whatever it might be. It sends that metadata to edge intelligence, which again, all of this is sitting at the intersection on the router itself. Once it does that, Edge Intelligence compares it to the signal phase. Now, this term is used as signal phase, meaning what does the timing cycle look like for the intersection itself, for the traffic lights themselves. So it compares it to what is considered the norm. All right, there's our fancy stoplights for y'all. And then it creates a public safety message to that virtual RSU that's in the cloud, right? And it sends it through a physical-based RSU. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference there. So when we say virtual RSU, remember, we're going back to the Verizon cloud, accelerating adoption for V2X. That doesn't mean that there's no need anymore for physical RSU. And the reason for it comes down to latency requirements. If you have a physical unit, you might take 2 milliseconds for latency requirement. But from a virtual, you're talking more 10 milliseconds of latency. So both of them are still very critical. But when you're talking about adoption, there's definitely some benefits from a virtual standpoint of using Verizon. And then the RSU will actually forward to the vehicle saying, there's a pedestrian coming. You need to be careful. Maybe people in front of you are going to stop. And using the messages that come through the intersection, you can also dictate how much traffic congestion there is, what the speeds are like, and other pedestrians crossing as well. And then you get a message that pops up. Now, not only would it go to the vehicle, but it could also go to the pedestrian to say, potentially, a vehicle is coming in too fast and it may have a less likelihood of stopping, just to alert the public, right? We call it mission 0, 0 fatalities. That's the goal. All right, let's talk about emergency vehicle preemption. This goes back to the life alert that I started the presentation with. So Neutron Edge, remember, it's actually residing on the emergency response vehicle itself. It's going to calculate the ETA of that emergency vehicle, and it's going to make a request, again, to the virtual RSU, going through Verizon. Once it talks to the IR1101, which is hosting Edge Intelligence, Edge Intelligence is going to authenticate that request and say, hey, I know where this is coming from. Let me go ahead and send this now to the traffic controller that's in the traffic cabinet. Q-Free, which is the traffic controller, will say, hey, I accept this authentication request. There's not a lot of white noise. I know it has a high criticality, and it'll change the light from green. Change the light to green, excuse me. The SpongeBob-looking emergency response vehicle comes across the intersection, and after that, we know the light is now green, and it creates what we call a TIM, which is a information message just for the public, essentially. And then Edge Intelligence forwards that to the vehicles through the Verizon virtual RSUs. Now the vehicles are alerted too, saying, hey, not only do you need to be careful, that maybe it's a congested intersection, but there's an emergency response vehicle coming. I know several times whenever I'm driving, you got to move to the side of the road. You have to respect the boundaries, right, of what they're trying to do and accomplish. But just knowing, hey, there's an emergency response vehicle that's coming, it's maybe 2 intersections away, and we're changing the pattern of the grid. It's something to be mindful of. And the driver's alerted. Amazing. Hey, so I'm going to end this off by saying, again, it's really a call to action here. I've only been in this space with this vertical, which was honestly so shocking to me to see how there really isn't a lot of support from the ecosystem and the community. And it's important because we're seeing autonomous vehicles more and more and more. Going back to that mission 0, 0 fatalities is super critical. And as you can see, there's really limited to no security, visibility and monitoring, incident response. And at the rate it's accelerating, folks, it is absolutely insane. So the call to action here is please, please do educate everybody you can. Please get involved in the space. Please reach out to us if we can help. And I just want to stop and say that it is truly an honor to be here in front of all of you, and I'm super, super grateful. So thank you very much. I'll take any questions. Feel free to walk up to the mic if you have any.
Examples that you used, are they that prevalent across the United States? I mean, are they that common? I mean, I've been around a lot. I haven't really seen
very, very common.
Major metropolitan areas?
For sure, especially if you think about the sophistication of the city, county, or state. It's all on different levels, especially from a cybersecurity standpoint.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Amazing. Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate your time.